Each of you assembled here today decided that you were going to see that 10 other people are registered before the last day, which I think is next weekend, the 14th, I believe. Just see what a power you can be. And then after getting people registered, that is another and even greater responsibility, and that is to go out to vote. Now, I'm not going to be long. I'm going to be very brief. I'm not here to make a speech. I'm here to make a plea, and I'm here to urge you to do something that I think you will do and something that I think you want to do. And each of us has a moral responsibility, if we are of voting age and if we are registered, to participate in that decision. I come here to urge every person under the sound of my voice to go to the polls on the 3rd of November and vote your convictions. Now, I know you're intelligent people, and I don't need to tell you who you should vote for. I don't have any fear about that. You know who to vote for. I'm just asking you to vote. And so all men of goodwill will go to the polls on November the 3rd. And I hope we will have a great day in our nation so that when we wake up on the 4th of November, we will know that America has made the right decision.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and for those of you who might be new to this show, the Umoja Circle is an African-centered talk show who understand that it takes a shift in consciousness. Only through dialogue that you'll get a shift in consciousness. And when you have a shift in consciousness, you have a shift in your worldview, okay? And we know that throughout our time here as people of African descent, a lot of times people get things wrong, but there are many times where people get things wrong deliberately. And we must know through our understanding of our history and seeing it from our worldview and our perspective, what it means to be not only American, but a person of African descent in America. And we talk about topics that include us as African Americans, that from that perspective, but it can be understood through many different groups who participate still in this American experiment. And at the beginning of this show, there was a little clip about voting from Brother MLK, Martin Luther King, who him and people like Medgar Evers, even some white Americans who gave their life for this process. And just like the last show, another quote that I like to use from Martin Luther King, who said that politics in a democracy is the way that the belief or interest of one group is translated into public policy. In other words, whoever's in the position of power in this political system, they have a better opportunity of having their beliefs become law or become politics. Right now, the people who are in power at the federal level and in many of the state level government are the Republican Party. And I'm going to repeat another statement that I said last week at the beginning of that part one of that this topic on the necessity of us as people, not only of African descent, but as Americans, to use the system that we have, called the suffragists, getting the suffrages, the right to vote. Too many of our people died, like I said, for that. No different than any war. And in that statement, I would like to use this statement that was very popular in the 50 years ago in the 60s. It says that politics is war without bloodshed, while war is nothing more than politics with bloodshed. In other words, many people are upset of the discord in the political system that's going on right now in 2018 as we speak. In fact, like I said last week, I did this two-part show in reaction to what happened the previous week when you had all that terrorist bombing campaign by Trump follower. Then you had in Lexington another Trump follower who's listening to his rhetoric, nationalist rhetoric, being invaded by others who have to look brown or black or of a Jewish faith. Went up to two grandparents. They weren't together and shot them, one in the back. I don't know whether the lady was out in the parking lot, both black. He just randomly shot these people. And then he turned around and was walking away, was approached by a white person who had a gun, who was carrying, but did not shoot. And he told them that white people don't shoot white people, and he walked away. Okay, shot two people, grandparents, on that day. Then there was another incident on that following Saturday of that week when somebody walked into a Jewish synagogue and shot, including police officers, with a semi-automatic, and I think it was 11 people were killed in that incident. And if you look back at history, you know, the many, for people of African descent, you had Tulsa, Oklahoma, where whole neighborhoods were wiped out. You know, Colfax County, where a whole county of people, hundreds of people that looked like me, were the same, and it's the same nationalistic views. They were spurred on by certain elites or politicians who had their own personal agenda, who believed that they were maintaining, heck, we had a civil war based on the same ideologies that we're dealing with coming out of our own White House as we speak. Those who have that nationalistic, alt-right, neo-Nazi kind of view of their superiority and their rights as whites, even though they dominate and control the Senate, white Americans or white males, the presidency, white male, the Supreme Court, majority white male. Yet they are given this idea that somehow they are aggrieved, that all these people who are using as citizens the process that is defined by the Constitution and earn their rights to be citizens. And with that came certain inalienable rights according to the mission statement, like I said, which I call the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution, which is the structure that was established to carry out that mission statement based on the Constitution, the words in the Constitution. The Republican Party right now, in conjunction with the neo-Nazis, certain other white nationalists, and even white evangelicals, find themselves in the position of power to set their ideas and beliefs. Because politics is about power, and that's what people battle for. Interest groups are similar to armies in the war, hot wars, the wars that are immediately devastating to countries and to towns and to cities, like what's going on in Syria or what went on in Iraq. You had the shooting war, various different interest groups, from the Kurds, to the two different type of Sunnis and or what's going on with the fight about Israel. There are interest groups. Our political system functions like that. If you read the Federalist Papers with Hamilton or John Jay, or Madison. That's what those 80-something essays were explaining to you. And they used military terms to define how the Constitution would work and how it's supposed to control the passions. So when people say, why is politics so nasty? Why is politics, what's with the vitriol? Well, you're fighting a war, whether you know it or not. And it has been a perpetual war for 242 years. That's how this system is supposed to work. You're supposed to go through a structured system, a political system. Why do you think that when you listen to politicians talk about the adversary, they talk about the honorable this or Congressman that and my good friend this? There is a way that was set out. They're still fighting a dirty, vicious war, but they have to do it in a way where they try to do it logically. I can't say that's what's going on now with its current administration, but that's the intent. They understand that instead of fighting a civil war like happened in Europe perpetually, almost for thousands of years, for some purpose or interest, you channel it through a political system. The results can be the same. It can be devastating, not only physically or emotionally, but mentally. What happened in Washington for decades in the early 1800s that led up to the Civil War, most of that Civil War was going on in the political arena. If you study what was going on in Washington, we see the Southern agricultural representatives and the Northern interest groups. It was vicious. It's supposed to be vicious. I'm sorry. War, politics is war, but without bloodshed. Even though some people, there were certain incidents, in the 1850s when they literally went to fisticuffs right there in Congress. But that's another time. But what I'm saying is those who try to use that as a reason not to vote don't understand that you earn your citizenship by the vote. If you don't do that, then whatever comes out, whoever interest becomes into office and you don't help in either preventing them by voting them out or not voting for them, and you're in the majority in that, then you are doing what that citizenship means. Those who come here as immigrants, in other countries, they don't have that rights. When you have, kings and queens and, that don't have a constitution, or you have chiefs or whatever, they have absolute power. The people just have to do what they say. And when you have an authoritarian type, dictatorial person who takes away your rights, then you're at the whim of that one individual. And if they're psychotic, their actions would reflect in how the people are treated. We have that unique, sometimes complex, sometimes aggravating process called the political arena. And it's supposed to be perpetual debate. That's what people don't seem to understand, and they get turned off by it. Well, yes, war is not a pretty thing. Ask any military person who fought in World War II or Korean, if you got a great-grandfather or grandfather who's a veteran of those wars, some of them don't want to talk about it, or the Vietnam War, or our current servicemen and women who have to deal with the pressures of the Iraq, and we continue with the Afghanistan war. Wars are not pretty. Yeah, the parades and those people who are in power, the politicians who we don't really keep vigilance on their decision, they only have the power we as the people allow. And many of us, when you look in the mirror, if you don't even know what's going on in your local political arena, then whatever problems that are happening around this country, it's about the collective of we the people, whether it's in your community collective or whether it's in your city collective, whether it's in your state collective or your federal collective. It is the collective of all the people who must participate in the only kind of system where you have a voice is the political process. And if you deny yourself that, then you deny yourself the power. I know some of you might think, well, it's not worth it, but give me something else that's better. Sitting home and doing nothing and then complaining about the results and how the government worked. The government worked based on who is in position and who votes. Believe me, those who are selfish and want their own power, people who takes on a kleptocracy type of idealism. In other words, what can I get out of the system? How can I rob the system? That's what we've been dealing with for almost 2 years now under this Trump administration, a kleptocracy. We're not a functioning democracy, even though a democracy is not really always works well. That battle is constant. As long as this country works, you have to have a process to channel all the energies of a diverse collective of over 300 million people. Those founding fathers didn't even have a concept of this amount of people. But somehow that experiment that is still going on, is still being utilized, is keeping this country going for 242 years. All right? So I also want, like I did last week, I want to show you some statements to emphasize, since I don't seem to be able to talk right now, to emphasize what I'm talking about. This first statement was made by MLK at the end of the Selma March over the Pettus Bridge that we hear about. And this statement says, Selma, Alabama became a shining moment in the consciousness of man. The battle is in our hands. We can answer with creative nonviolence that the call to higher ground to which the new direction of our struggle summons us. The road ahead is not altogether a smooth one. There are no broad highways that lead us easily and inevitably to the quick solution, but we must keep going. This is what Martin Luther King said, part of the speech that he made at the conclusion of the Selma to Montgomery March. What he's saying, what he's letting us know 50-something years later, and those who are complaining about the struggle that they see and every day is the same thing, I'm tired of this in the news. Come on, you're watching a war, a perpetual war. We have been given the mandate by that generation of civil rights activists and other social activists about the 50s and the 60s who were trying to expand the right to vote, who were dealing with ways in some of those southern states of preventing black people who 100 years previous fought a civil war and then worked towards getting involved with the political system, having to fight the Ku Klux Klan, having those ex-Confederate states, after they were defeated in 1865, for another 12 years, they started reestablishing black codes, which were another way of putting those our ancestors who were freed, okay, by the 13th Amendment, who were given citizenship by the 14th Amendment, and who were given the right to vote by the 15th Amendment. Many of those amendments were ignored, okay, by those ex-Confederate states. The same states that a lot of them we have to deal with today, like what's going on in Georgia with the purging of certain registration of a lot of African Americans, or what's going on in, I think, either the Dakotas with the Sioux Nation, where the state legislators are trying to make it impossible for 2 districts in if it's not in the Dakotas, I know in one of those Midwestern states, northern Midwestern states, where there's a vast amount of the Sioux Nation in 2 districts They changed the legislative because they have the power. They're in the positions of power. Some other group voted them in when whoever ideology that would prevent that didn't vote or ignored what was going on because they were too busy passing life. And then they changed the rules and where people in those reservations who mostly have mailboxes, those private mail, but don't have street addresses. Now you're required to have a street address in order to vote. And they only changed that in the last 2 years. Why? Because a lot of those Native people voted for Obama in the 2008, okay? And they made sure that they didn't have the right to vote. They're purging, making rules with people in power, like the state attorney general in Georgia or the state attorney general in Kansas, who are both running for the same office and both being challenged by women of color. Okay, one is the Native American, I think, in Kansas, and one is a black woman. But they're doing the exact same thing that was done using the black codes in the 1870s and 1880s and 1890s, okay, after we were giving our citizenship, okay? So there is always been a perpetual war, 2 points of view. And that's what we're fighting every day. And we must be vigilant as American citizens. Otherwise, don't complain. You hear how passionate I am. I am tired of hearing people say, why should I vote? The government don't work and blah. It doesn't work because you don't work. If you are not vigilant, if you don't know what the person that you voted for, and you make sure they don't get corrupted by that citizen, I always look at the politics. Talk to any soldier who's been in a battle or a war. He doesn't come out of the other end of any battle or any field of when he goes R&R smelling pretty, or his uniform is clean or pristine. No, it's dirty and grimy. Even though you get this illusion of guys in suits, and they're not walking around with a 5 o'clock shadow or with rings around their eyes like any soldier in combat who's been in combat for a long period of time. Don't get that twisted. Politics is a war. People who've been fighting this war. If you were, we got a street here called Cesar Chavez. Who do you think he was fighting for the field workers? It was a war. The civil rights movement. From 1950s to 1960s, Rosa Parks got on that bus. It was a strategy of war. And you had an opposing interest group. And politics is about power. Who gains power in that war? And it's an ebb and flow. And we channel those warlike instincts from a shooting war, what happened when they lost it at the end of the 1850s, and you went into the early part of the 1860s, and that political war turned into a shooting war for 4 years. And look at the devastation that it caused. They estimate over 750,000 people at the end of Civil War in 1865. But if you include a lot of the non-combatants, a lot of the African Americans who lost their lives, who were civilians also and weren't counted, the farm animals, the millions of acres of land that were destroyed, it was a devastation. That's what you don't want to happen. That's why they channel that energy politically. And it's up to us to make sure it stays contained within that system. But we must participate if you want to make sure that you maintain what that mission statement called the Declaration of Independence, that you have your rights based on that. And whatever amendment was attached to the Constitution. In the Constitution, we were people of African descent was 3/5 of a human being. And how that was used? Well, it maintained the power of the southern states. So for every 500 enslaved people, you had 300 votes automatically. Politics is vicious. Politics is I'm not sugarcoating it. It is a war. And you have a battle coming up in 2018, November 6th of this year. And your weapon is the vote. The war that you're fighting for is the future of your children. If you are a woman, if you are a person of African descent, if you're Latino, if you're gay, that war is, if you don't get the people who are in power, the majority of them out, the ones who are making these policies, that's going to affect your life and devastate your children's life in the near future by 2030 or 2040. The battle that you're fighting now reverberates. It doesn't maintain itself in the day that you vote. The results of those votes reverberates like a ripple into the future. We are dealing with the voting of people in the 1960s, in the 1970s. Every right that you have, whether you are a disabled person or a person who gets Medicare or Medicaid, somebody voted decades ago, and that vote is affecting you to this day. The people who are in power now want to take that away. They want to deal with your Social Security, even though it's your investment into your future. Every time you get a FICA taken out of your paycheck, it goes to that fund. It's not a benefit given to you by some power. That's a lie. And you are going to have to deal with that yourself collectively. If you don't, then it's not even worth what we have to say. And let's put up the last statement at the end. Nobody will ever deprive the American people of the right to vote except the American people themselves. And the way they could do this is by not voting. So think about it. Will you deprive in 2030, you don't have any Social Security, you don't have any Medicare? Well, the coming November will determine what future you'll be living in, what future you'll be giving your children. Will they love you or curse you out? Think about it. Bye.